You carry a hollow ache inside that no amount of success can seem to fill. You've chased the promotions, built the relationships, constructed the outward appearance of a life. And still, at the end of the day, something fundamental feels absent. A structural emptiness lives at the center of who you are, quiet and persistent, like a room in a house that was never furnished. This is the father wound. Not a personal grievance, not a chapter in a self-help book, but a structural collapse in your psyche that leaves you drifting without a map. Today, we use Carl Jung's wisdom to rebuild your internal architecture and finally bridge the gap to selfhood. Jung gave a name to the personality pattern that emerges most frequently from this wound. He called it the Puer Aeternus, the eternal youth. And while the term might sound romantic or poetic, the psychological reality it describes is one of quiet devastation. The Puer Aeternus is, at its core, a defense mechanism. Not a character flaw, not a moral failure, a defense. A way that the psyche protects itself from a world that has never felt structurally sound. If the foundation is unreliable, why build on it? If authority figures cannot be trusted, why seek out commitment and accountability? If the world you were handed lacked coherent rules, why not remain in a state of permanent possibility, where nothing has been risked and nothing has been lost? The pure lives in a space of perpetual potential. He is endlessly gifted, perpetually promising, always on the verge of something extraordinary. He has the brilliant business idea that never becomes a business. He has the novel inside him that never gets written. He moves from city to city, project to project, relationship to relationship, each time arriving with the genuine belief that this time will be different. Before the weight of commitment triggers the same subconscious alarm, if I build this, I can lose this. And underneath all of it, driving the whole pattern at a level the conscious mind cannot easily access, is a subconscious search. The pure is not simply avoiding adulthood. He is waiting. Waiting for the authority figure who never arrived to finally appear and say, I see you, you are real, you are enough. Now you can begin. This is the Jungian insight that cuts to the heart of the wound. The boy who did not receive adequate fathering does not simply move on. He carries the incompletion forward into every domain of his life, endlessly recreating the conditions of the original dynamic in the hope that this time the outcome will be different. He finds demanding bosses and attempts to earn their approval. He falls in love with emotionally unavailable partners and makes it his project to finally crack their reserve. He gravitates toward movements, ideologies, and online communities that promise to bestow upon him the sense of belonging and legitimacy he never received at home. None of it works because none of it is the right transaction. You cannot retroactively receive the fathering you needed from the outside world. The wound was created in a specific developmental window that has permanently closed. The external search is, at bottom, a misdirected grieving process, a refusal to mourn the loss of what should have been, because mourning would mean accepting that it is, in fact, gone. And so the cycle continues. Potential without action, motion without direction. The architecture of an impressive life sketched in the air but never laid in stone. The result is not just stagnation. It is a peculiar kind of suffering that is difficult to articulate because it has no visible cause. The Puer Aeternus is not obviously broken. He is often charismatic, intelligent, and full of genuine longing. But the longing has no object it can honestly name, because to name it would be to grieve it, and to grieve it would require a kind of courage that no one ever modeled for him. At some point, the longing curdles. This is almost inevitable, and Jung's work on the shadow helps us understand why. The shadow is the repository of everything we cannot consciously acknowledge about ourselves. The unacceptable feelings, the shameful impulses, the parts of our experience that have been split off because they were too painful or too threatening to own. For the person carrying a father wound, one of the most potent shadow contents is resentment. It is deeply uncomfortable to feel rage toward a parent who was absent, especially if they were absent because they were suffering, especially if the culture around you insisted that gratitude, not grief, was the appropriate response. So the anger gets buried, and buried things do not disappear. They migrate, they find other targets, they shape behavior from underground. The shadow of the father wound shows up most clearly in the relationship with external systems and authority. The man who could not direct his rage at the father who failed him begins to experience a generalized bitterness toward the structures of the world, toward institutions, toward employers, toward governments, toward any system that presents itself as holding authority over his life. This is not entirely without basis. Those systems often are corrupt, often are inadequate, but the intensity of the reaction, the way every injustice feels personal, the compulsive quality of the grievance. That is the shadow at work. The absent father is being projected outward onto every available screen. This projection is one of the most dangerous features of the unhealed father wound in the current moment. In a media environment saturated with charismatic authority figures promising to restore order, to fight the enemies responsible for your diminishment, to give you back the sense of belonging and direction you never had. The psyche with an unprocessed father wound is extraordinarily susceptible. The unconscious search for the patriarch attaches itself to political leaders, to online personalities, to movements that offer the clean narrative of an enemy to blame and a father figure to follow. The wound is exploited, not healed. Jung was explicit about this. He wrote that the most dangerous political movements in history had succeeded not primarily through rational persuasion, but through the exploitation of unconscious psychological needs. Above all, the need for the strong father who would make the chaos stop. The father wound, when left unintegrated, does not simply cause personal suffering. It becomes a vector through which individuals are made politically and psychologically vulnerable. Integration requires something most people resist: mourning the idealized father. Not the actual flawed man, but the father you needed and deserved and did not receive. The one who would have taught you how to be yourself in the world. The one who would have said, clearly and consistently, "I'm here, I see you, you can do this." That father does not exist. He may never have existed. And the grief of that truth, when finally sat with honestly, is staggering. But here's what Jung understood about grief that we often miss. It is not the ending of something. It is the clearing of space. When you mourn the idealized father fully, when you stop searching for him in your boss, your partner, your political idol, you reclaim the energy that the search was consuming. That energy becomes available for something that was previously impossible: building the internal structure yourself. This is where the work becomes genuinely creative. Jung's framework of archetypes offers something profoundly practical for the person emerging from the father wound. The archetypes are not just descriptive. They are prescriptive. They are patterns of psychological energy that exist in the collective unconscious and can be deliberately engaged, cultivated, and internalized. The king archetype establishes order, takes responsibility, and governs the inner kingdom of one's own life with fairness and consistency. The warrior archetype sets boundaries, tolerates discomfort, and acts in alignment with values even when it is costly. The magician archetype pursues mastery, develops genuine competence, and transforms raw experience into meaning. These are not metaphors for personality types. They are, in Jungian terms, actual structural components of a mature masculine psyche. And crucially, they can be built from the inside without an external father having installed them. What does this look like practically? It looks like what we might call self-fathering, a deliberate process of providing yourself with the psychological structure that was not given to you in childhood. Self-fathering begins with discipline, but not the punitive, self-flagellating discipline of the wounded psyche that mistakes suffering for growth. It is the discipline of the good father, consistent, reliable, and rooted in genuine care for the self. It means making commitments to yourself and keeping them, not because you will be punished for breaking them, but because you have decided that you are worth keeping promises to. It means building routines that provide the daily experience of structure: sleep, movement, creative work, genuine rest. Because the body and psyche require rhythm the way a building requires load-bearing walls. Self-fathering means learning to set boundaries, not as an act of hostility, but as an act of self-definition. The boundary is the statement of where you end and where others begin. It is the practical embodiment of the protective perimeter that the father archetype was supposed to install. Every time you hold a boundary under pressure, you are laying another course of bricks in the wall of a self that can actually stand. And self-fathering means taking personal responsibility, not as a burden, but as a creative act. Recognizing that the refusal to be responsible is the refusal to be the author of your own life. Victims have things done to them. Authors make choices about what happens next. The shift from victim to author is perhaps the most fundamental movement of the healing process, and it cannot be made while waiting for an external authority to grant permission. This internal reconstruction is not merely a personal project. In the context of 2026, a world of genuine and accelerating volatility, where institutions are failing, where economic and ecological and political uncertainties compound each other, the individual without internal architecture is structurally unprepared. The storms are real. The question is whether you have a foundation that can hold. The work of rebuilding your inner structure is not navel-gazing. It is preparation for a reality that will test you whether you are ready or not. There is a moment in the Jungian individuation process, the lifelong journey toward wholeness that Jung considered the central task of the human being, where something shifts. It is not a dramatic awakening. It is more like a quiet settling. The center of gravity moves. Up until this point, the psyche has been organized around a deficit. The absent father, the missing blueprint, the hollow at the center. Everything has been oriented in relation to that void. The search for approval, the avoidance of commitment, the projection of resentment, the longing for the authority that never came. All of it has been a circling around an original wound. What shifts is this. You stop circling. You step into the center of your own life and you claim it. Not with bravado, not with the performed confidence of someone compensating for insecurity, but with the quiet, settled authority of someone who has done the grief work, integrated the shadow, built the internal structure, and arrived at a place of genuine self-possession. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming, fully and irreversibly, the particular individual that you are. Not a version of your father that you are either emulating or rebelling against. Not a placeholder waiting for someone else to validate your existence. A person who has made the decision, consciously and with full knowledge of what it costs, to be the primary architect of their own reality. The shift from seeking external permission to building internal sovereignty is not a one-time event. It is a practice, and it is ongoing. There will be days when the old hunger reasserts itself, when the hollow ache returns and the psyche reaches again for the father who is not coming. On those days, the work is not to suppress the longing, but to recognize it, honor the grief underneath it, and return, consciously and deliberately, to the authority you have been building. Because here is the final crucial realization that Jung's work points toward. The void was not a mistake. The wound was not simply a deprivation. In the Jungian framework, the thing that breaks us open is, more often than not, the very thing that creates the conditions for genuine depth. The man who was handed a complete psychological blueprint from a loving and present father may never be forced to build one consciously for himself. He may live a full and happy life, but he may also never know the particular quality of hard-won selfhood that belongs to the person who constructed their own foundation from scratch. The absence, when metabolized, becomes material. The hollow becomes the space into which something new can be built. The missing architecture of the self, the thing you have ached for your entire life, was never truly missing. It was waiting to be constructed by the only person who was always, and will always be, responsible for it. You. The father wound is real. Its effects are real. The grief is real, and it deserves to be honored. But you are not a child waiting for a father to arrive and make you real. You are the architect. You always were. And the blueprint is in your hands.